from the geoarchaeology, just looking at the soils and the landscape and trying to look at putting the site into the landscape that it once resided in. So like down here there is quite clearly a valley which would have had a brook in it. Today it's a winterbourne, though just by looking in the past it's almost definitely in the Roman period. Really quite a large stream. It would have been ideal for ironworking. It wouldn't have had any of this woodland in it at all. It would have been quite clear, and also there are packets of alluvium there where the sediments have flowed out and there are thin veneers of the alluvium. Now that may be because of clearance and vegetation, clearance upstream and agriculture associated with the Roman period, so we might be able to pick that into it. But then in front of me we have the Ouse Valley, and we know that from our work there that although the Ouse Valley has got a huge broad floodplain that just looks like it's a couple of flat fields, we know that actually the alluvium under there is 8 to 10 metres deep, and the Roman layers are probably 3 metres below the present surface. Therefore the whole shape of the landscape has changed. But also the alluvium there is a result of deforestation and Roman farming and prehistoric farming, which have built up the sediments. So the soils have eroded from the hilltops into the valleys, down the river valleys, and then flooded out. So I'm trying to create a picture of the whole landscape by looking at the soils and joining the dots together to try and help the archaeologists put their sites into a slightly broader landscape. In topographical terms, the fact that we're sitting between two valleys, today we think of water as just being, unhelpful, and it's some way a hindrance because we can't cross it or we can't travel up it. In the Roman period, water was much more important because coming up and down the rivers and using them as transport was much more important than roads. It was much easier to transport along a river with a simple boat that most Iron Age and Roman people had. Whereas going along a road would mean you've got to go and walk somewhere, or you've got to have animals to do that. And so the fact we're overlooking two river systems means that we can get wood and items up and down the river to site, we can transport people to site, and the fact there's a road here is the important thing. And then as a consequence of that, we have had activity here, and the activity here has therefore sculpted this landscape by helping infill some of those valleys, by hiding the original shape of this, and by unpeeling those sediments we can start to understand the story of what's happened in this landscape. Well, as an environmental and geoarchaeologist, I would say of course the answer is yes, but I feel that archaeology is a teamwork, and the environmental archaeology and the geoarchaeology are an important element of that team, and it's just a case of making sure you get everyone on board and that you ask all your scientists and your specialists strong archaeological questions of the landscape, and then we can help address those questions from an archaeological perspective rather than a geological or a scientific aspect. How we're contributing to that is really quite making significant changes in large-scale interpretations of whole landscapes. So whole landscapes which we thought people came in the Neolithic and cut down the woodland from, we can now see that in Sussex that's true. But in Wessex, prehistoric people exploited natural openings in the landscape, and that has come as a result of large-scale multiple environmental analyses over 30 or 40 years, and that has changed the pattern of archaeological thought and also made archaeologists now rethink why sites are where they are and why landscapes are there and what people are doing there. On the other side of the other end of the spectrum, one thing which archaeology can do, and archaeological environmental archaeology can do in particular, is we have time depth. We can look at change over time, over hundreds of years, over thousands of years. So changes in development and changes in land use are reflected in sediment pools and in river valleys and in alluvium and in hill wash. But also we can therefore see how modern activity is impacting on that. We can see whether modern farming has a significant effect or insignificant effect. When we see erosion today, we might think it's catastrophic, but in many cases if it grows over with grass the next year, we may then forget about it. What we can do with archaeology is calibrate that and see how catastrophic it is. And we can see that, for instance, in the past when the trees were cut down, we had massive elements of erosion. We can now see that with the introduction of modern farming since the 1980s, we now also have catastrophic erosion. And as a result of archaeologists being involved in a number of big political teams, the archaeologists helped the soil scientists devise systems for modern farming, which was now implemented by the government as advice. And so in some ways it's rather ironic that archaeologists interested in the past have actually helped in some cases use the past to form and define the future. Yes, I am an archaeological scientist, but I'm not a scientist. I am using scientific methods, scientific analyses to help us understand people in the past. And therefore archaeology is not a science, but it doesn't stop us applying science to the interpretations and adding that in to the mixture.